Now, a lot of talk around spring football. We had some spring games last weekend, one of which was the Florida Gators out there in Gainesville, and you saw DJ Lagway throw in darts, had some special teams mishaps, which, didn't get you super fired up. But I think you saw a lot of good things during that spring game. Now, spring, we've said it a million times on this show, it is for taking a temperature of what you have in-house. It is not for making a diagnosis. It's for gauging symptoms. And the symptoms we saw in that spring game, I think, only support the thought that we've had around Florida, really since the season ended. That is, I don't think that things are quite as dire as the public narrative would lead you to believe. Now, we might be the last one out there on this branch having some optimism for Florida, but I think there is real reason for optimism in Gainesville. A couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, you have a quarterback in Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz caught a lot of punchline culture from the social media platforms when he transferred from Wisconsin to Florida. People were talking bad about Graham Mertz. People were talking bad about Florida. All Graham Mertz did last year from where I was sitting was play some really good football, some of the best football we've seen him play in his college career. He gets to have another year in that system under Billy Napier. Being able to build off of what you did from last season to the next season with the same coach calling plays for you, that matters. That matters, and I think we're going to see him progress. Important to also mention, for Graham Mertz, you have a very real offensive weapon. When I say offensive weapon, I'm talking about you have a dude to where when it is 3rd and 3, you can feel very confident targeting him and getting him the football in Trey Wilson. He was a true freshman last year, burst onto the scene, going to be a true sophomore this year, blew up the spring game with over 100 yards receiving, had 11 targets. Like, they're going to get him the rock every which way possible. The reason why that matters is, especially in the SEC, you have to have answers offensively. And not just answers within a scheme like, hey, we like this play on 3rd and 2, we like this play on 2nd and 4. Like, you got to have answers in terms of when we play the big boys within our conference, we know that this dude on our roster is a winner for us. A winner in the sense of if we get a matchup we like, if we get him one-on-one, we like our guy more than we like their guy. 9 times out of 10, he's going to win that matchup. He's going to allow us to stay in this game. You saw that against Georgia last year. They fed Trey Wilson early on in that drive, and you saw tremendous success being able to build off of that, being able to keep that on your roster with a quarterback that's elevating in his 2nd year in the system. Those things are going to allow for Florida, I believe, to be very competitive offensively. Now, are there some things that have to happen to maximize that? Of course. I think you got to have, like we've talked about a couple of times on this show, you got to have another pitch to go to. You'd like to see Shamir DK step up, Montrell Johnson, Jaden Baugh, if they can be a 1-2 punch in that backfield along with some other guys. That would be nice, but I'm just saying there's some things to be excited about if you're a Florida fan offensively, some real reason for optimism. And we've said it a lot on here about on the show, man, with Florida. That defense, I think, is improved. And it's very okay to be cautiously optimistic here. It's okay to say, I don't know if I want to trust just yet. We've said this a couple of times on this show, and y'all always blow up the comment section when we do it, so we'll say it again. There's a little bit of that Rod Wave syndrome with the folks out there in Gainesville defensively. Heart been broke so many times, man, I don't know what to believe. The heart is on ice for the good folks right now that are rocking that blue and orange gear and go to the swamp every Saturday. It's fair, but I think it's also fair to look at what was last year's unit and look at this year's unit and say, okay, night and day, we have more experience, we have better depth, we have probably a higher talent level. There's guys behind in that 2 deep that we feel good about, like Pup Howard, I think, is going to be a dude for you. Asa Turner's about to come down there and thump. He's a 6-year player coming over from Washington. Like, there are some real dudes on this roster defensively that are going to put you in a better position than you were last year. And we talked about it on yesterday's show when it comes to things that we do as college football fans that aren't probably good for our health, but we do them anyway. One of those things was piecing back together a schedule and the aftermath of it and kind of living in an alternate reality of, well, if this thing happened this way, then that changes the record for this game and that changes this thing. And then we kind of talk ourselves into a team that was, 4-8. They end up being 10-2 by the time we piece back together all the alternate realities. I don't think you have to make that much of a leap for Florida to say that they could have been 7-5 versus 5-7. It's a 2-play difference. It is what it is. But I think when it comes to what you expect from Florida, that's going to dictate your happiness in 2024. Because everyone's talking about Billy Napier and what he hasn't done and how he's on the clock and all that. Like, however you expect Florida's 2024 to go, that's going to dictate your happiness. If you're expecting Florida to play for an SEC championship in Atlanta, I think you're going to be a little bit disappointed. But you look at the schedule, man, it is an absolute Hunger Games for them that last month of the season. Let's pull it up right here. I got it on my computer, so I'll read it off for you here. When you talk about what they have in November, Florida, they're off the week before, moving into November. They play Georgia and Jacksonville. They're at Texas. They play LSU in the Swamp, Ole Miss in the Swamp, at Florida State to finish the year. That's brutal. There's no way around it. That's absolutely brutal. When you look at what Florida could accomplish in 2024, I think you have to use the eye test and the context and have a nuanced conversation. Because if you're going to be black and white about this whole thing, and you say if Billy Napier goes 7-5, we're going to fire him, that's your choice. That's your decision. But I think if Billy Napier ends up going 7-5 and we got 4 one-score losses to 4 college football playoff teams, 4 top 10 teams, are we sure that it's best for everybody involved to part ways with that guy? A team that's telling you multiple times, hey, we're close, we're close, we're close. We're building something here. There's buy-in here. We're playing these top-tier teams in college football down to a score. Are we sure that we want to move on from that? Because I would also say when you talk about context, let's talk about the roster that Billy Napier inherited. And I don't think he would ever tell you this straight up, but I have to believe that when he got there, he did not inherit a yacht of a program. He inherited a boat that had a lot of holes in it, that was taking on water, and that he had to patch up, quite frankly, both culturally and from a roster talent level, to even get it to be in a place where it could be competitive. And so last year was what it was. I think that was probably about what Vegas expected. Over-under win total was 5.5 wins. They went 5-7. It is what it is. But when we talk about what they're going to be in 2024, if you're expecting them to be competitive, I think they're going to be that. You expect them to look better and play in a bowl game? I think they're going to be that. How they look against the top teams in the SEC, I think, should dictate your assessment of Billy Napier and what he's done at Florida. Because if you dropped Florida into the ACC, I think you talk about them being a conference title contender. If you dropped Florida into the Big 12, I think you talk about them being a conference title contender. I don't think that they would be the odds-on favorite to win either of those conferences, but I think the way that we would view them is vastly different than how we would view them right now in the SEC. Now, nobody's complaining about being in the SEC. Heck, that's a blessing if you're the Gators to be in the premier conference. But with that being the case, the context around what Billy Napier inherited and what they did last year, what they have going into this year, everyone's just burying the Florida Gator football team and put them in their coffin already before we even played a game. I'm just sitting here saying, like, I see a lot of reason for optimism. I see a quarterback that can sling it. That's probably going to be better than he was last year. I see one of the best playmakers in the SEC, if not the country, in Trey Wilson. I see a defense that should be improved from a year ago. That was your Achilles heel. You got more oversight for Austin Armstrong as well with Ron Roberts. Like, there's so many layers to this thing where I'm looking at them like, they may not win the SEC, but gosh dang it, if they're not substantially improved, if they're not a 7-win football team, I'd be a little bit surprised, to be honest with you. Be a little bit surprised. So the way that it looks, the way that 7-5 looks probably matters a good deal more than the actual record. But I think Florida will be competitive. I don't think that they're just a team you should just write off and pencil in as a win for your team when you go down the schedule preseason. I think Florida's got real reason for optimism from a roster standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from how they've been put together over the course of these 3 years. There's a lot to build on. Last thing I'll say when it comes to culture, we talked about it at previous different points when it comes to Florida, man. Like, there were multiple times where this team could have shown us we don't play for Billy Napier. We're out. And I'm not saying that you have just 100% buy-in across the board. That's rare for the most part in college football. But this team could have packed it in multiple times a season ago. They didn't. Played a lot of teams tough all the way through to the end of their schedule. You don't get credit for playing teams tough, but I do think you find out a lot about a team's culture when things aren't going exactly how you would like them to. Things didn't go Florida's way a lot of times last year. With that being said, still seems to be some belief in that locker room around Billy Napier, and I think they will have a little bit of an edge to themselves when it comes to what they do in the fall. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.